Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday, May 20th, 2020 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is in accordance with the executive orders from the governor to effect social distancing and mitigate the spread of the COVID-19 virus. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting. However, please be patient if there are technical issues. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter the meeting ID #924-5796-9823. This information is also available on the published agenda, in the public notices section of the city website, and on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN Channel 16, AT&T Channel 99, and online. I don't have the URL for the website. But it's, if you look for Ann Arbor and CTN, if you Google those things, you should find the CTN website. Let's see here. Oh, so now, Kayla, I'm going to ask you to call the roll, please.
All right. Thank you, Molly. So I'm going to just announce a couple of updates about our commission roster. So we have a couple of changes. Our Regional Transit Authority representative, who was previously Matthew Webb, is now Ben Stupka. So you'll hear that change when I do the roll call, as well as the city administrator seat for the Transportation Commission is now filled by Tom Crawford. So you'll hear that as well. And in addition, we have a new commissioner to welcome who's with us tonight. So I want to welcome Brett Hajimaki and invite Brett to say a sentence or two about himself as introduction to the commissioners and to the public, and then we'll move into roll call following that. Go ahead, Brett.
Hello, thank you. I'm Brett Hajimaki. I'm thrilled to be part of the Transportation Commission. My wife and I, with our two small children, live in Lower Burns Park, where we are avid pedestrians and bicyclists. We just got back from a bike ride. And I am also an engineer for Ford Motor Company, focusing on fuel economy and battery electric vehicle development. I have a ton of respect for what you guys have done on this commission, and I'm really excited and honored to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. And I will now, I'll announce some regrets that we have received for attendees. So Commissioner Margolis is not able to join us this evening due to the Ann Arbor Public Schools Board of Education meeting, and Sergeant Bill Clark is also unable to join this evening. I will now call the roll. Please say here when your name is called. Commissioner Boland.
Here.
Commissioner Felt.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Commissioner Hadumaki.
Here.
Commissioner Hull.
Here.
Commissioner Kleinman.
Here.
Commissioner Lernahan.
Here.
Commissioner Parsons.
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter. Commissioner Summers.
Yeah.
Commissioner Woods.
Here.
Commissioner Crawford. Commissioner Dolan.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Hess.
Here.
Commissioner Stupka. We have a quorum.
Okay, great. So now we move on to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Okay, great. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved, Parsons.
Okay. And a second? Julie Boland, Commissioner Boland. Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please say yes. Kayla, do we have to do roll call every time for this?
No, we do not.
So, well, okay. So maybe just a quick hand raise. All right. It looks like we have the agenda is approved. So now we're going to move on to public comment. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. So again, I'm going to read you the phone number and the meeting ID number. Please call 1-888-788-0099 and enter the meeting ID number 924-5796-9823. This information should also be displayed on your screen if you're watching the meeting right now. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. In order to electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. Please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. So I know it can take a moment or two to call in, so we're just going to pause for a little bit and give folks a chance to call. And then if we don't get any calls, we'll move on.
While we're pausing, I'm just going to announce and welcome that Commissioner Tom Crawford has joined the meeting, so I will update the attendance to reflect that Commissioner Crawford is here. Thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Any sign of calls?
No calls.
Okay, give it a couple more seconds.
Yeah, I know there's a delay on the CTN broadcast, so yeah.
All right.
Yeah, at this point, we don't have any public attendees in the meeting. So I think that we're probably okay to move ahead past public comment this time.
Great.
That's right.
All right,
Would it be, could we include public comment if someone were to call in during the meeting, or can we,
Yep.
can we just agree that, yeah, if somebody calls in and we could just, if they're having technical difficulties, whatever, we'll accept.
Yeah, we'll make that work in a way that's not too disruptive if we can.
Cool. Yeah, that's great.
Great, thank you, Brad. Okay, so we're going to move on to information and discussion. And we would now like to invite Dr. Missy Stoltz to provide an update on A20.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's lovely to see you all. I look forward to the time when we can actually physically be in space together and be safe and healthy doing that. I really appreciate the opportunity to do a quick update on A20. I will happily share slides if we need them, but I stare at a screen all day, and so I was looking forward to looking at your faces as opposed to PowerPoints, and I hope you feel the same, but maybe I'm mistaken. So just a quick introduction. I won't assume that you remember anything about A20. So A20 is the city's draft plan for how we could achieve carbon neutrality community-wide by the year 2030. And kind of the pillars of that work are equity, of course, greenhouse gas mitigation, as well as adaptation. So how are we adapting, for example, to the rainfall that we just had over the last several days? It feels like years, honestly, I have no sense of time anymore. Over the last several days, while also doing everything we can to prevent those kinds of impacts from getting worse by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, so we're not kind of fueling the fire, if you will. So that's the work. The goal is, as I mentioned before, community-wide carbon neutrality by 2030. So think, how are we doing that from the perspective of all of our residents, our businesses, our major institutions, the city, government, et cetera. So we had been working for quite a long time, although I guess not that long in the grand scheme of things. In November, we launched Council declared a climate emergency and set us off to figure out how we could achieve that lofty goal. And the deadline was to come back to Council by the end of March with a plan. And so we've been moving through that process. There are, if you've seen the plan, if you haven't, you can see it. You can look at it right now. I can also show it to you. It's on A20 spelled out.org. And it's on the main page. You can download it. Take a look and dive in. And when you look at the plan, what you'll see is 7 overarching strategies. And those strategies are really the bedrock. They're the foundation of the carbon neutrality work. Underneath those 7 strategies, and I'll walk through them in a second, and this may be where I share my slide. Underneath the 7 strategies are actions that will help achieve that overarching strategy. And the way we think about that, at least from the OSI side, is Office of Sustainability and Innovations, is that the strategies are they're really the core of the work. And because they're the foundation and the core of the work, there's less flexibility in the strategies. The actions, though, to get there will change, right? So we've presented actions that came out from public engagement, extensive rounds of public engagement from our technical advisors, based on the peer-reviewed literature, based on what peer cities are doing, and those actions have been vetted. But the truth is, we all know technology is changing. Markets are changing. COVID has changed things. And so things that were possible or we thought were possible look different. And so the actions are inherently far more flexible. And I can give an example in a moment when I walk through the strategies. I'll point one of those out. So the 7 overarching strategies, it's really 6 with a catch-all other category. So the strategies are powering our electric grid with 100% clean and renewable energy. So that is a core tenet that we've got to figure out how to do. And we have 4 actions underneath that proposed, but that powering our electrical grid with 100% clean and renewable is the motivating kind of central strategy that we have in that category. The second is switching our appliances and vehicles from gasoline, diesel, propane, coal, and natural gas to electric. So as we're cleaning up that electric grid, we start transitioning things over to electric. The third is improving the energy efficiency in our homes, businesses, schools, places of worship, recreational sites, you name it. And this is ubiquitous. We've got to do this. This almost always, well, I don't know any case where this doesn't lead to financial savings. And what we're trying to do is figure out those first 3 strategies I shared with you, how we package them together so that you can, if we're trying to scale rapidly throughout the community, how do we do that with kind of a one touch when we're coming in? Let's say you're really interested about solar or you're really interested in insulation. How are we packaging it so that you're learning about other things in that one interaction that help you kind of create a path that's customized to you for how you move forward and actually achieve what we're calling the A2 opportunity. The 4th strategy is reducing the miles we travel in our vehicles by at least 50%. This is the one that if you were with us last time I spoke, that really made me nervous. This was a big ask. And what's different, this is where I'll kind of pivot on this, is COVID has shown what it looks like when our streets aren't congested with cars. We've had consistently a 50% VMT reduction, and we know that we actually had a 70% VMT reduction at over different weeks in this process. So I want to be clear, I'm in no way, shape, or form saying we need a pandemic to deal with VMT. That is not what I'm saying. What happened through COVID for me very personally is I saw what was possible when the streets are prioritized for pedestrians, for cars, for non-motorized transit, in a way that I couldn't even have imagined. And so for me, a mental barrier was broken down. And so I'm hopeful, actually, in a way that I wasn't, that this strategy is possible, especially with things like work from home policies for certain folks. That is becoming a much more viable thing that we thought there was no way we were going to have a huge portion of our public actually work from home. Well, we're doing it, and we're seeing more and more companies saying we are going to move to almost exclusively a work from home policy. And so there's a shift that's sort of happening in the culture right now. And again, I want to be clear, this is only for certain types of jobs that a work from home shift happens, but it's not an insignificant portion of the workforce. And so that all is cascading in terms of positive ramifications of hitting that VMT reduction strategy. So that's the 4th strategy, making sure I get my math right. The 5th is significantly changing the way we use, reuse, and dispose of materials. Put kind of for those in the solid waste space, this is about a circular economy. How are we making sure that when things are done, their life cycle continues because they're repurposed for another use within the system, that you really minimize and aim for no waste, right? So everything has a useful life in perpetuity is the objective in a circular economy. The 6th is enhancing the resilience of our people and our place. And again, this is a tenet that kind of moves throughout, but it was, for us, it came out in public engagement, and it's something that we really care a lot about and realized it should stand on its own as one of the core strategies. And then the last strategy is the other category. And this is the home for things that don't belong anywhere because they belong everywhere. And what I mean by that are our equity programs, for example. They need to be everywhere. We can't just have them in this bucket kind of off on their own. And then we have a grant program that we run where residents can apply to get up to $10,000 to do something related to sustainability. But I don't know where that belongs, because what Bradley comes up with is going to be different than what Wendy comes up with, which is different than what Jim comes up with. And so it kind of crosses all of the individual actions. And then the other thing in that category are greenhouse gas emission offsets. So if we choose to move in that direction and purchase offsets, we wanted to make sure we started working on a strategy for what those would look like so they align with our community's values. There's a whole spectrum. If anyone's followed greenhouse gas emission offsets, there are really, really cheap ones that do nothing. You're basically just buying something that already exists and you're pushing someone else off of it. You're not creating more renewable energy. You're not making an investment that ties to justice. And then there are those who do all of those things. And there's a wide chasm between them. So we want to have a really targeted approach to understand what are the best offsets if we're going to move in that direction, and what does our community want to see in those offsets if we choose to make that a large portion of our strategy, which right now in the plan, it is in the plan. So that is the overarching strategy profile. For this group, I'll just ramble on for a few more minutes and I'll stop and take all your beautiful questions. The two, at least in my mind, most obvious categories, I think you probably care about a lot of those strategies and the actions that fall underneath them. I certainly wanted to make sure to touch on the electrification, because we're talking about electrifying our vehicles as well and how we're making that transition. And then the second, of course, is the VMT reduction. And so in the VMT category, hitting that 50% reduction, there are really 3 subcategories of actions that fall under there. And those are enhancing non-motorized transit. The second is expanding public and regional transit, right? So we have more walking and biking infrastructure, and then we also have more buses, bus rapid transit, whatever that manifests and looks like. And then the last are changes in land use. And the changes in land use are probably the most contentious in the discussion, but it came out and it continues to come out in our discussions. Almost every time we were in a public meeting, it was openly discussed. And the decision was made to make that explicit, right? To not kind of put that aside, but to put that on the table and say, we think the community needs to have a conversation around this. And so we're going to put it in the plan and just own that is contentious. So I'll leave it at that. Lastly, I just thought I would share that we are working with our colleagues like Raymond and Eli Cooper, working on the transportation plan. We had a meeting today as well. We were working previously with our colleagues working on the land use master plan. We worked with our colleagues in the solid waste resource management plan. So the idea is not to have a carbon neutrality plan that is an island. The idea is, how do we help make this, if this is something that we really want to see move forward, how do we make sure it permeates everything that we do? So all of the activities are enhancing and building momentum to actually achieve this really audacious and exciting goal. And that means that job descriptions kind of morph too, right? That if the transportation plan and the A20 plan have parallels, well, that means part of all of our jobs are promoting really smart transit patterns, right? If that's what emerges through that discussion. So we are trying to coordinate it internally and externally as we move forward. And then kind of closing out, I wanted to share next steps. One is, I'm completely going to use this just to share good news with you, which is just today, we released, a press release went out, I think maybe an hour and a half ago, that we just won a grant for an Aging in Place Efficiently program. And this is with partners like Ann Arbor Meals on Wheels, Habitat for Humanity of Huron Valley, the Seniors Bureau, and Michigan Saves. And what we're trying to do through this program, it's a 2-year grant program that is jointly funded by the Ann Arbor Area Community Foundation and jointly funded by the National Partners for Places program. And it's targeted at low-income seniors to help them stay in a home of their choosing, whatever that place is, for longer. We know they have healthier outcomes when they stay in a place that's safe and comfortable for them. And we're going to be doing that by pairing social services. We have a really robust aging in place infrastructure in our community, and by bringing energy efficiency into the equation. So we're going to help people have physical improvements to their homes that help their homes be healthier and safer for them. And through energy efficiency, also making them healthier and safer, but saving them money too. So they can stay physically in their home and their bills decrease, which means they have more fiscal resources to be able to invest in whatever they need, perhaps their transportation costs, because costs obviously change as the profile of our spending changes as we age and move through different stages of life. So we're really excited to see that program start. We'll be starting most likely in the fall. And we just had a kickoff meeting today to really think about what that program will look like, past COVID and in kind of a COVID situation. So more to come, but I just wanted to share that good news because I haven't got to tell anyone publicly today. So you guys get to be the first that I get to tell publicly. So that's where we are in the process. We are having a discussion with council on June 1st about the plan. We have on A20 website, we've done a number of Q&As, public Q&As. We had Zoom meetings similar to this. We have a Q&A document with some of the most common questions we've gotten from the public. And so I just encourage you, obviously, to share any questions, concerns, ideas you have right now. But if you have something that pops up later, please send me a note. I'm happy to help answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stoltz. So now we're going to open it up for commissioner questions and comments.
Do you want me to call?
Oh, sorry. I was just changing my view. Yes, Councilmember Griswold.
We've had a number of different plans, and I just want to make sure I'm looking at the very last one. And so can you tell me, I know council received one on Sunday. Is that on Legistar? Because I usually try to go to Legistar to get the official.
It is, yeah. So this is something that's come up a few times too. What happened is the plan moved pretty fast. And so we sent the plan about 2 months ago, right? And then we had time in between to get it designed. So on Sunday night, we finished the design. It's been a little bit like that, as I think you know. But yes, you can see it on Legistar. It's also posted though on A20 for folks who may not be as savvy at navigating Legistar.
Okay, so on Legistar, it would be the first one listed with the latest date. Does it have a May?
It would be in your Legistar package. I believe Sarah very graciously updated the Legistar package from Monday night, so it's in there.
Okay.
And I can put it. I think we're coming back June 1st, so I'll make sure to upload it on that as well.
Oh, okay. I can just look for it for the June 1st date then.
It's not in there yet. So go to Mondays.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Haven't gotten there yet.
Other questions? Yes, Councilmember Lernahan. Sorry, not Councilmember, Commissioner. I'll get there. Commissioner Lernahan.
Thank you. Thank you, Missy. That was a really nice presentation. I have two questions. One is, how are we going to be able to track the energy efficient home improvements that homeowners make so that we know if we're on track? So that's my first question.
Do you want to ask them both, or do you want me to take them?
Sure. The second one is, have you had some discussions regarding improving public transportation, whether that's with AATA or maybe discussions around regional transit? I just want to know where we are with that.
Yeah, good questions. So for the first one, there are there's one very clear way we can track that right now, energy efficiency improvements in homes, and we are in discussions for far more granular ways to track that. So the easiest way, and I say easy just because the system is already in place, to be clear, is we get data from DT in aggregate for our consumption patterns in the residential sector. So I don't know what you used in your home, but I know the entire residential sector used this many kilowatt hours of electricity and this many therms or CCS of natural gas. And so we'll see a drop, right, in that through efficiency over time. And so that's one way. That's pretty coarse, right? So we're in discussions with DT about alternative ways that we could be tracking that. Like, can we do the sub-metering and actually have that report anonymously into a database? And so we're able to see, person A, whoever that may be in the system, started here and is now here. So we're working on different ways to get that in a more effective manner. The Aging in Place Efficiently grant, though, will give us really, really granular information because we're going in and we're using grant dollars to do the physical improvements. We're also working with the county weatherization office to be able to leverage their programs. So in that case, it's also a different populace, right? Like I can't extract out that population to the entire population. It's just a different need profile. And then your second question around improving transit. So this is one that is obviously emerging. I shouldn't say emerging, evolving would be the right word, right? Transit agencies have been hit really hard in the COVID crisis. So what started in the process will undoubtedly look different, and we can frame that in lots of ways. I don't know the outcome. I don't think any of us really know the outcome. I've seen reports and speculation saying, you know, transit ridership is going to drop for a while as people are fearing being in enclosed spaces with others. I've seen studies that are showing what's going to happen is those are going to be displaced with walking and biking and work from home policies, right? So I don't know what's going to happen. And what happens in a place like New York or San Francisco is not what's going to happen in Ann Arbor. I also have seen a lot saying, actually, I think transit agencies are going to evolve into something else because we're putting a whole lot of money, likely from the federal government, into keeping them alive, but asking them to kind of transition into something else. So all I can say authentically is that we continue to engage with our transit partners and understand how best to support them in this moment and achieve our mutual aims of having a robust and strong transit system that serves all of our community members and serves the region. What that looks like, though, alas, I don't know.
Okay, Commissioner Parsons.
Missy, thanks so much. It's always good to have you here. You're an inspiration with your knowledge and your passion. Two questions that are sort of interrelated, connected. One is that I was curious, I think I remember that vehicle contributions to climate impacts is something like 30%.
In our community, it's 17 estimated, but we know that's an undercounting because we only calculate the emissions once they hit the city of Ann Arbor versus the entire range.
We're not, yeah. So I was wondering if we're below and above, and I assume with like 70,000 commuters coming in and out every day, we're actually much greater. So anyway, I wanted to clarify that, and it sort of ties in, as you mentioned with land use, it's so connected to transportation networks. I'm just curious about, you know, with your level of expertise in studying this and diving deep, can we do this without density? Is density the word that we're actually talking about when we say land use? And what would it look like if it didn't include density?
Bradley, why do you hate me? Let's go. Okay, so for the first, I want to circle back on the 17% statement that I said in terms of our emissions and make that really crystal clear because it is an important distinction. That we calculate, if you put kind of a bubble around Ann Arbor, we're catching all of the transportation related emissions in that bubble, but we do have an inordinate amount of people pre-COVID on a workday coming in. So we've actually, we have a draft methodology that we've been working on to capture those. We need to do a little bit more vetting. We're working with some national peers to make sure we feel really good about that number. Once we get that, we'll update our inventory, and then I'll be able to come back and say, actually, the emissions profile with that imbalance looks like this. So that number is going to change. And I think I want to be super transparent. We are constantly trying to be better in how we calculate things. And there are many things that this is standard. This is not included in local government inventories, right? Like, so the protocol, the numbers I gave you are exactly how everyone accounts, but almost everyone is also trying to be better and think more holistically. So the field is moving always. The land use discussion is tough. And I'm gonna put that on the table, and I'm gonna tell you what we know from the data. The data tells us that there is a fine line in terms of density. That you know, a 15-story building has less efficiency, generally speaking, than an 8-story building has. An 8-story building per square foot, the roof ratio, there is greater potential for things like solar and renewable energy in a place like us, right? Now, if we were in New York City where the profile looks different, it's a totally different scenario. So there's a limit to this conversation, like how far we can push it. That said, yes, I mean, like having density where density makes sense is part of the conversation. If we're serious about greenhouse gas emissions reductions and carbon neutrality and resilience, I mean, just last night, the head of the Huron River Watershed Council was part of a panel discussion we had on resilience in the region. And one of her strategies that the Huron River Watershed Council is focused on is densifying urban areas and protecting rural regions that serve as really key feeders into our key ecosystems, right? Like sprawl is not good in this discussion. And so if people want to be here, we either sprawl or we have smart land use policies. And so I'm dancing around a lot of code words that are out there because this is a really emotional conversation for people, which is why we just called it head on and said, we have to talk about this as a community and figure out where we want to land. And I don't know that there's a right or a wrong answer, but we got to come up with an answer. And that's where we landed.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's not like build, 50-story sky rises like New York City. I appreciate that it was a local answer, with our community in mind. And I didn't mean to ask a loaded question. I legitimately want to know, can we have transportation networks that could make this happen through sprawl and stuff? But you're right about environmental impacts through all of that too. You're right. It's sticky, but it's also just an issue, right? It's close to home. So anyway, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Am I missing someone? If I'm missing you, speak up. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Stoltz. This was a wonderful presentation, and we will see you. I'm assuming you're logging off now. So
I'm gonna go put a kid to bed. But
yeah.
Have a good night, everybody. Thank you for your service.
Good night. All right, so next we're going to invite Commissioner Felt to provide an update regarding DDA parking and curbside management.
All right. This is kind of a chicken and egg question, and the solution that Kayla came up with was to engage the DDA asking questions to start with. And this concerns a pet project of mine, which is to turn all of the parking on Main Street between William and Huron into handicap parking. And we had to ask, can that be done? Who's responsible? At what point would the Disability Commission, the Main Street Business Association, the DDA be involved? Who else should be involved? And the idea was to have that initiative potentially come from the Transportation Commission as a recommendation. We also had to make sure that we could do that. And things have changed. But we're just updating you that we did have one meeting with the DDA, and then they basically, my understanding is they came back and said, we've got a few other things going on now. We're not going to put energy into this at this point. But we did identify a number of points of information gathering and other things that we need to find. The background of this is pretty simple, that those people who are driving and have also accessibility issues, proximity matters a lot. And the downtown parking for handicapped permits, placards, is completely unpredictable and unknowable. There's no sense to it as far as how it's laid out. And so you don't know, there's no way to find out in advance where those spots are. And they also tend to be heavily utilized. And it would be an interesting pilot program. And it would be only a pilot program to start with, to see if freeing up Main Street to handicap parking would be helpful. And that those, at the point where I first sort of began to throw this idea around, people were saying, well, we want to eliminate cars on Main Street, we want to eliminate parking, blah, 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 but we need to do handicap, And this is a way to make that possible and also predictable as far as where that's going to be. And it can be either then expanded or contracted based upon evaluations of, is it working or not? And that's basically it. So that at a future time, once the DDA has had a little bit more time to develop some information, and we set some goals as to how to evaluate it, we'll bring it back to the Transportation Commission and say, is this something that we want to promote or forward to City Council? Probably has to have the authority to do this, but exactly who makes these decisions is it's not entirely clear yet. So that's basically it, just a simple update. And I think that as we talk about opening up the streets and possibly eliminating parking or closing down Main Street for part of the time, it would be interesting to see if this can be integrated in other ways. And so some of the people who are involved in that decision making at least have a heads up that this is a point of interest, is to address somehow the handicapped issue and accessibility. Is there anything else that I'm missing, Kayla?
No, I think that captured it, Linda Dan. I think what you said at the end is accurate. It was, I mean, I feel that it was a worthwhile discussion to have with the DDI because, as you said, as they're looking at the other changes, they're focusing on the COVID-19 response, and I think downtown business associations are going to be submitting potential requests regarding street closure or not using the parking space for parking, but using it for something else. But they're being more aware of this community interest in increasing handicap parking availability is something that I believe the staff appreciated hearing that feedback and can keep in mind as they look at other changes that are being made.
It's availability as well as predictability.
Yes.
Any questions or initial comments about? I'm not supposed to be recognizing people. I'm not the chair.
Supposed to be recognizing people. Commissioner Woods.
Yes, I just have a question, Commissioner Crawford or Commissioner Felt. But can you tell us how typically in a parking lot or parking structure, how is handicap, the number of spaces, how is that determined? And the placement, how is that sort of figured out? Are there experts out there that do that, or how does that happen?
There is a formula for both parking structures as well as parking lots. And so those would not be covered under this at all.
Okay.
And they have a formula for how to build them and where they're located and what percentage and all the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. So then for city streets, how does that come about? How is it determined right now in terms of where handicapped spaces would be placed, or
what we were told
let's say on Main Street right now?
Yeah, what we were told by the DDA is that there's no logic at all. A lot of them are just there because a business requested them at one point, or they're there because they're close to a ramp. And there's no rhyme or reason to it particularly.
Okay.
Not even a percentage or anything else, or the build out. And so we'd also need to find out if curb cuts have to be located within a certain range of the parking space themselves, and which would be one of the most expensive parts of this if that actually was required.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't know that at that point.
Okay. Well, thank you. I'm really glad to see that this issue is being discussed. Mr. Crawford, do you recall whether or not the city at some point in the past, actually there was some sort of I don't know if it was a lawsuit or a potential lawsuit particularly about the city ramps coming off of sidewalks and things like that? Could you refresh us about that?
Well, I do. That goes, sorry, I have a talkative pet in the back. I do remember that lawsuit, and I know the city's been working on that for a number of years. I'm not at all refreshed on the status of where we are on implementation. Maybe Mr. Hess knows.
Yeah, my understanding is, there was I believe it was through the Department of Justice. You can file a ADA complaint through either the Department of Justice or the Department of Transportation. And so there was a summary judgment that was against the city to make sure to go through and update ramps. And so the city has had a ramp replacement program in place for several years, as Mr. Crawford mentioned. I don't know exactly how many years, that predates But if it serves me correctly, last year, the city did get notification from Department of Justice that we have satisfactorily addressed the complaint. That being said, I will say the city continues to have a ramp replacement program. So I think there's an acknowledgement that the work is not necessarily done per se, but it did, the kind of ruling against the city has been effectively addressed, but we still continue to make other improvements.
Commissioner Hull, did you have a question?
Yeah, so this Main Street thing, is this the idea to, like, what exactly is the plan with this Main Street thing?
There's no plan, but the concept was to make every parking place on Main Street between Huron and William handicap parking. So there would be no
So are they
parking at all.
talking about bringing this back at some point? And at that point, would they perhaps have a presentation at the Commission on Disability Issues?
Yeah, and the question is, at what point in the chain of events that would happen? But definitely that the Disability Issues Commission would be a part of and consulted.
Okay.
Briefly, clarification for Commissioner Hull. So the proposal that Linda Diane had put together, as she explained, that was Main Street. Sorry, I'm forgetting the limits, but William to Huron. Yeah, and that's sort of where part of what we were discussing was what would the best next steps be. Is that the best area? Is there a different way that the DDA sees a pilot moving forward around this? Who should be involved? The Commission on Disability Issues, the Downtown Merchant Associations, others. Those were some of the conversations we were having, but we just didn't, because of addressing the COVID-19 response, it was kind of put on hold, but absolutely we would revisit those other groups as well if this is when and if this moves forward.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I would just like to suggest that any plan to use part of the street for outdoor dining, which I do support, but we need to take into account handicap parking needs in the area as well.
Yes, and I think we'll actually be talking about that a bit more in the next agenda item. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Felt, for bringing this to us. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about it again in the future as things get clearer.
Hope so.
Great. So now we're going to invite Commissioner Hess to provide an update on the City of Ann Arbor's Healthy Streets effort.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, my apologies. You'll notice I turn my video off from time to time. My internet connection tends to go in and out. So if I go max headroom on you for any moment, just ask me to repeat if I had a disruption. So my apologies. Thank you to those of you that got the max headroom reference. All right. So there were a couple series of communications on kind of what we're now calling healthy streets. This has to do with transportation opportunities for social distancing amid COVID-19. Last month, about mid-April, there was an internal memo that was shared with the Transportation Commission. The purpose of that memo was really to kind of discuss what has been done and what could be done, and then possibly also share considerations for, you know, what might go into lane closures, street closures, parking closures, whatever the case may be, to allow for healthy streets. And so the conversation continues to evolve. At their first meeting in May, City Council passed a resolution giving greater clarity in terms of which things should be done by staff administratively versus which items need to come back to council. And so we produced a memo that was sent to you, I believe, on Monday that gives some further refinement of that memo that was shared back in April. with a real focus on process. What we really wanted to kind of make sure we were being transparent about is these are the different things that are up for consideration. This is how staff will evaluate them. And so I'd like to quickly walk you through it. A lot of the information is, some of the information is new, some of a version you've seen already from. The first thing I'd really like to draw your attention to, and Kayla, I'd like to try to share my screen.
You should have access. There should be a green share screen button in the bottom center of your Zoom screen.
Thank you. All right, so the first thing that we developed is a website, the a2gov.org, which is the city's main portal, /healthy streets. If you click on that, it will take you to this web page. This web page is the one that we're going to use to kind of disseminate information, kind of explain what's going on, give updates on things that have been done. The memo that is in your packet and that I'll be referring to is posted at the bottom of this page. But probably the most important thing I want to draw your attention to is the public engagement tool that we currently have. So it's, kind of, you can click on the image or you can click on this share your input, and it will take you to, in theory, oh, maybe I can't do that. Okay, Kayla, I'm going to probably have to, oh, new share, let's do this. So what this will take you to, if you click on that map, it will take you to this pin drop function, which allows people to suggest any variety of transportation improvements to allow for social distancing. And so the way it works is, you can just kind of zoom into an area and drop a pin. I obviously won't submit it because I don't want to create a false positive. You can submit the street name, the starting point, the end point, how you would like to see the street used, walking, biking, wheelchair rolling, or other. If there's any other description or thoughts behind that. And then we're asking for people to provide their address, and I'll explain why in just a few moments, related to neighborhood closures or no through traffic closures. And then there's some demographic information. If respondents want to kind of let us know a little bit more about themselves, they can click through that as well. The other thing that's interesting is when you go through this exercise and you click through this, there is an opportunity to see the outcomes of everything that we've heard to date. And so I would just want to quickly show that with you as well. Bear with me as I switch screens. So if at the end of that survey you get through and you say, I'd like to see all the responses to date, you are directed to this map, and you just click OK. And then you can see all the suggestions that have been made by yourself as well as your fellow Ann Arborites. And you can click on the details and it will kind of show you what is being suggested. 2nd Madison, 7th and Madison, walking, biking, wheelchair rolling, and others. So it is something we're trying to, again, really show everybody the comments that we're hearing, allow people to see what's happening. And if there's nothing that you take out of the rest of this meeting, please share this link. We want to get as much input as we can from the community and really populate this so that we understand where there's a desire for closing neighborhood streets to through traffic, where there might be interest in, as we talked about just a moment, closing parking lanes to allow for outdoor dining, whether there's interest in closing a lane of traffic for biking or walking or wheelchair rolling. If there's interest in what we call pedestrian recalls, where if there's a high push button area in the community for the PED crosswalk sign, if there's interest in kind of making those continually on the PED cycle so you don't have to push the button. We've initiated that in some locations, But if there are other locations, we're welcome to take any of those sort of suggestions using this tool. So
Raymond,
that was just, yeah,
Can
go
I
ahead,
say
Kat.
one thing? Just I want to let people know when we click those pins on the survey result page, that's providing limited information that has been submitted, just so you know, and in case you get questions from others in your networks, your address that you submit and any demographic information are for internal use only. That is not going to be made publicly available.
Thank you, Kayla. Yeah, that's an important distinction. So, yeah, so again, I really encourage all of you through your networks to push out this survey to, again, help us populate where there's interest in the community, where there's support for these different contemplations. Obviously, there's other factors that go into the final recommendations and the final actions of whether it be from council or staff. But obviously, if there's a groundswell of public support for some of these initiatives, that's really helpful for us to move some of these ideas forward. So I'm going to quickly go through some of the highlights of the memo. I'm not going to go into a great deal of information. I just want to kind of give you the thumbnail sketch of the different things that are being considered and what's been done. Feel free to, stop me or ask any questions, or we can talk a little bit more afterwards as well. So the first thing is we talked about leading pedestrian intervals. This is something where you may have seen downtown, the PED crosswalk light comes on a couple seconds in advance of the green light for vehicles. This is a safety measure. It allows pedestrians to kind of get out in front and be in the crosswalk and be more visible before cars come through the intersection. Especially this helps for turning vehicles, making right turns or left turns. We've initiated this citywide, and we expect to keep this in place. So this is kind of a exciting development. It's something we were able to do with in-house resources. We expect this to kind of last in perpetuity. Pedestrian recalls, like I just described, are the opportunity. The PED symbol be illuminated with every light cycle and not have to push a button in order to activate it. We have implemented these at strategic locations around the hospitals, and they already exist in places downtown. And we are open to any other suggestions from community members. So it's one of those things that we're taking on a case-by-case basis in terms of how we move those out beyond that. Neighborhood slow streets, I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing. There was a lot of discussion among council and from members of the community that we heard about this idea of closing local neighborhood streets to through traffic. So no through traffic, local traffic only. So these are not closures per se. Vehicles can still go through, but the idea is the only people driving would be people who live in the neighborhood and or like services, like deliveries or solid waste management, things like that. So what we're going to use is the public engagement tool that I showed you, and the thought process that we currently are at, which is something that I think some of you will probably want to discuss, is we put a threshold of if 1/3 of the people along that street have requested this local closure, we would go ahead and implement that. And that's something that council gave the directive to staff to just go ahead and do. We don't need to go back to council for it. The reason why we picked 1/3 is because typically our processes are 50%. So if you know the traffic calming program, or if you know the residential parking permit program, we require a petition of 50% of the residents along a street in order to kind of qualify to get into those programs. We brought it down to 1/3 simply because, in this time of social distancing, it's kind of difficult to go around getting people to sign petitions. And to circulate news about the online tool can also be difficult. I know my neighbor, but I don't know my neighbor's email address necessarily. So that all being said, we kind of picked a number, 1/3 of people along a street. That number still may be too high, and that's something I would like to get some additional feedback from the group on. Let me just quickly go through some of the rest of the suggestions, and then we can circle back to I can get feedback reaction to some. Repurposing on-street parking, as we kind of discussed, the idea here is we can close parking spaces for several different purposes. One of them was mentioned already, the idea of having outdoor dining, within the on-street parking space. If you think about downtown, for example, there's a lot of sidewalk dining that occurs. Well, if we want to keep people socially distant, we have to be able to kind of use space differently and allow maybe some of that outdoor dining to be shifted further into the parking, or because it's not dining if people have to be social distancing. So that's one opportunity for repurposing on-street parking. The other is to allow for what we call pedestrian passing zones, that in areas where we know there's going to be high pedestrian volumes, where there isn't an opportunity to social distance, we could block out strategic parking spaces to allow pedestrians to kind of get around one another and still maintain that 6 feet of social distance. The next one that's described in the memo is downtown lane closures or road closures. We did make a distinction between downtown lane or road closures versus lane or road closures elsewhere, because the downtown lane closures are going to largely be coordinated through the Downtown Development Authority as well as the merchant associations. This was direction that was given by City Council. It makes a lot of sense, obviously, because the businesses really know how their businesses are going to be impacted by any sort of road closures. And so the considerations for downtown are a little bit differently than something that might be on the outskirts of downtown. We are just on the downtown lane closures, we are going to be sharing the results that we're getting through that public engagement tool with the DDA and with the merchant associations. The way that may manifest, just so you know, is it may manifest in a couple different ways. It may come back to City Council as like a special event permit. So, if you can think about like art fair, for example, roads are closed to support, these fairs or special events in the street. It may come back in that fashion, or if it's a longer term sort of closure, it may even be an intermittent closure. We've been hearing some discussion about maybe just closing certain streets on weekends. And so there's, I think some of that is still being talked about and still being figured out. There's a meeting tomorrow, and we'll see what direction we're hearing from the merchant associations on that. Downtown lane closures and road closures, similar idea, but there's maybe a different opportunity. Here, there might be the opportunity to look at multi-lane roads. Downtown, we don't have a lot of multi-lane roads, but if you think about have more than one lane, there could be an opportunity with traffic being down 50% or more to take away one of those outside lanes, or both outside lanes in each direction, or one outside lane in each direction, and allow people to walk and or bike in those. And so, if you think about, roads that are 2 lanes in each direction, you could create pretty long corridors that could connect pretty much the entirety of the city through a network of these kind of closed lanes. So we're interested to see what sort of feedback we get from the community and if there's support for those ideas as well.
Excuse me, Mr. Hess, if I can interrupt 1 sec.
Sure.
Chair Kleiman, I'm sorry, but I've got a commitment at 8 o'clock. I need to sign off. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us.
And then we also specifically called out bridges. Bridges are pretty much the same thing as a multi-lane closure. For example, we've heard from some members in the community about the Broadway Bridge being particularly difficult to traverse. There are sidewalks on both sides, but it's hard to maintain 6 feet of social distance when you're on that sidewalk. So in order to get across that bridge, if you're a cyclist and or a pedestrian, or both at the same time, looking at bridges kind of specifically as pinch points in that transportation network and what those opportunities are. So it's just kind of a similar flavor of the multi-lane road closure. Then there's a partial lane closure. And by this, we're talking about, if you're familiar with the concept of bicycle boulevards or kind of creating artificial cul-de-sacs, the idea is that vehicles can go through a road, but they may not be able to traverse the entirety of the road. But they'll get to a point where they're forced to make a turn or to turn around, but bicyclists and pedestrians can continue to go through. And the purpose of that, or the idea behind that, is really meant to calm traffic, slow traffic down, and slow down the volume of traffic that might be going up and down a corridor, and instead allow bikes and pedestrians kind of this unfettered access the whole corridor through. So, again, this is another tool in the toolbox that we'll be considering. If we, Washington Street is a great example. Washington has been mentioned in both the non-motorized plan as well as other documents. If there's a lot of interest in looking at Washington, Washington can provide an interesting link east-west through the city. This could be a treatment. We couldn't do a full lane closure because people live on Washington. There's the YMCA, there are businesses, there are all kinds of things. But you could do a situation where, as you're traversing Washington, you get to a cross street, vehicles can't go straight, they have to turn, but bikes and pedestrians can go straight. That's the idea behind the partial lane closure. Another one that we explored that we've seen in some communities is pedestrian use of bike lanes. Right now, per city code, pedestrians are not allowed to use the bike lanes, but since we do have a network of facilities, there might just be an administrative thing or amidst emergency to allow for pedestrians to walk in the bike lane, at least to pass one another in sidewalk areas. So again, looking at what kind of input we get from the public, looking at the sort of connectivity of networks we're trying to create, this might be something that we'll consider as well. Sidewalk gaps is another consideration we're making. It's similar to a partial road closure. If we know there are critical gaps in the sidewalk where we already know people are walking, on, I forgot what, Commissioner Parsons didn't like goat paths or deer paths. We call
Desire
them
paths.
Desire paths,
Desire
yes.
paths.
Yes, if we know there are desire paths, there might be an opportunity for us to kind of cone out those walking areas to allow people to traverse safely using the public right-of-way, using the roadway. And so this might be another opportunity for us to really look at where those opportunities are and create kind of those connections that currently don't exist. So I went through that pretty quickly. My apologies. I think just in the interest of hearing from all of you and your reactions, I wanted to give you a high-level idea. There are some costs associated with each of those in the memo that we want to make sure we're bringing that forward, especially when we go to council. We'll have to get some authorization for how to pay for some of these as well. So it's again trying to keep the conversation going and add new layers of information to it as this situation evolves. So Madam Chair, let me turn it back over to you all so that you can hit me up with questions.
Great. Commissioner Boland.
Hi, Raymond, I think this is really super exciting, and I'm looking forward to all of this being in place, and the pandemic has left me really short of patience. So how quickly can some of these measures be put into place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we did a soft launch of the public engagement tool on Monday. We're going to continue to promote that. As a matter of fact, Kayla set up a meeting on the calendar tomorrow for us to talk about other ways to get the word out about getting this public input. So the things that can be done administratively, such as the neighborhood slow street, closed to through traffic closures, those can be done pretty much whenever we see kind of this groundswell of support for them. Like I mentioned with the leading pedestrian intervals and some of the pedestrian recall buttons, we've already implemented some things. So the things that we can do administratively, we're really looking for, where there's input and kind of positive support for some of these ideas. We will go ahead and implement those. Some of the bigger, obviously, so if you think about the downtown street closures or parking closures, there's an ongoing discussion with the Downtown Development Authority, with the merchant associations, as well as police, public works, and others to make sure that we can continue to serve solid waste, right? If we close a road, we need to make sure we can still get the garbage trucks in there. And if it's just an intermittent closure, if it's on weekends, we need to kind of coordinate the logistics on that. If there's a full lane closure or a full road closure, we do have to take that back to City Council. We haven't do that with the submitter yet in terms of process follow. Obviously we'd have to bring forward a resolution. We might look to council members if they want to sponsor a resolution, because that can help fast track it. Typically, if staff brings forward a resolution, it could take upwards of 6 weeks. So we won't. If there's again, a lot of support, I'm sure it's in the interest of many people to try to get those before council for their consideration as soon as possible.
Can I just say, I have a few concerns about the neighborhood strategy, in that it seems like that's going to sort of prioritize really close-knit neighborhoods and neighborhoods where people feel very empowered to make these sorts of requests. Yeah. And I wondered if there might be some more systematic way of approaching that. Like if we knew that what mattered for the success of these was, I don't know, the number of children on a block, or just the density of people on a block. I mean, do we know what's optimal in terms of setting these up?
Yeah, I think you've raised some great suggestions. Admittedly, the reason why I deferred to a process akin to traffic calming or residential parking permit is we wanted to be sensitive to those that want something, but at the same time, those who might not want something as well. You'd be surprised how much of our job is kind of mediating between, neighbors who like an idea and don't like an idea. That's a lot of what the traffic calming program is. And so we're trying to be sensitive to this idea of really making sure that there's enough support in the neighborhood for this sort of treatment in order for it to advance. But again, one of the reasons why we have this discussion tonight is if there are other considerations, I'm all ears. This is evolving. If you all would like us to look at something different, like what you just said, density, things that we are running serious of how we can make sure we're reaching hard to reach populations. So through the lens of equity, making sure that low-income populations, minority populations, that we're really making a concerted effort to reach out and get that input.
Okay, great, thanks.
Commissioner Hadamaki.
Hi, couple of questions. First, for the Healthy Streets initiatives for residential streets, if a street is closed to through traffic, does that also include a lowering of the speed limit for that street? And secondly, we were just talking about ways to maybe expand access or knowledge to for residents to know that the survey exists, if that's really the only way to initiate the closure of a residential street. What have other peer cities done? Do they authorize staff to go through and do those street closures or to through traffic, or do they also rely on similar kinds of surveys?
Sure. So let me take your first question, which was about is there a complementary reduction in the speed limit on streets where there would be a closure to through traffic? The answer would be no, at least as we understand it. 25 miles per hour is pretty much the posted speed limit for all of our neighborhood local streets. And it's my understanding that through Michigan law, that's the lowest speed limit that's allowable in the state of Michigan. So we can't actually lower the speed limit any lower than it already is. On a sidebar, my understanding is there is legislation being contemplated to allow for or a different way of setting speed limits, but that has not passed yet, as I understand it. So there really isn't much we could do in terms of lowering the speed limit any lower than what's currently posted at 25 miles per hour. In terms of the process that we're seeing in other communities, I think it varies. I have seen some communities that have been a little bit, have carried out a lot of these measures a little bit more administratively, that they look to some of the planning documents, they look to, what are the long-term plans to initiate bicycle boulevards, for example. I used Washington Street as an example earlier. Let's go ahead and use this as almost a tactical urbanism approach. In other words, we can put in a temporary solution, see how well it works, and if it works really, really well, then we can continue that maybe, beyond COVID-19, and it's something that could, it's like a test of something that's already identified in a document or has already shown some support. I will say that is something we are looking at. We have several documents and networks that are identified, gaps that currently don't exist. The public engagement tool is one of kind of the important pieces that we're looking at. But yeah, that threshold of 30%, it's not something I'm seeing necessarily in a lot of communities, but I think there are different engagement tools that other communities are using to allow folks to give comment. Another strategy I've seen in other communities is they just go out and do it, and then they ask, what did you think? Is it working? So it's, instead of getting front-end public comment, they initiate the project and then they adapt and iterate after the project is in. So we're kind of deferring to a little bit more front-end engagement to make sure that there's public support for some of these ideas before we advance them.
Councilmember Griswold.
Thanks, Raymond. I am ready to bring resolutions forward, and especially Washington Street. And I think that that's sort of a, part of it is residential, part of it is within the DDA. So I'm not sure how you would identify it, but I would love to have a resolution that we make it a bike boulevard, local traffic only, as quickly as we can, and then see how it works as traffic starts to increase. I had a couple of questions. One is someone monitoring C-Click Fix? Because there's a crosswalk area code there as well as a sidewalk, and I just want to make sure that if there are some requests, that we're not missing them because they're out on C-Click Fix.
And Councilmember, I apologize. My connection broke up when you identified the location. If you could repeat the location for me.
Washington Street?
Yeah, I heard that one.
Oh, okay. And the other one was just C-Click Fix, or the A2 Fix-It system, because I think I saw at least one request on A2 Fix-It. So hopefully someone who monitors that will give you feedback or give the person who placed the ticket feedback to move over to your system, the Healthy Streets questionnaire. Does that make sense?
I think we might, Raymond, there you are.
Yeah, no, I got it that time. Thank you for that, Councilmember.
Okay.
So, yeah, so I think that's great. What I'll do is I'll check with our communications department to see, I think this, but A2, the way C-Click Fix or A2 Fix-It works is depending upon what categories clicked, it gets routed to different departments. So I can connect with the communications and IT folks to see where different things are being routed and let those people know who are the recipients of those tickets to route them to us, so then that way we can factor it in. But that's a great suggestion. It isn't something that we had thought about yet, so thank you for that.
Oh, okay. And then e-bikes, I think we need to consider that in the future. No real discussion tonight. I just wanted to throw that out because I know they're increasing. And the last thing is sidewalks and bike lanes start being overgrown with vegetation, and people put tickets in, and then it usually takes about 4 weeks to get it trimmed. And so I'm hoping that the Transportation Commission can consider something that's a little more proactive, because if we're sending people out into the street, we should at least make sure that the sidewalk is clear and that the bike lane is clear. So thanks.
Yeah, and thank you, Councilmember. I think on that last point especially, you know, rely on crews to some of that back through the Forestry Department and others. So this is something that I encourage everybody to use A2Fixit, C-Click Fix for it, that if you do see overgrown vegetation, to submit that so that that ticket gets routed to them to go in and do that vegetation clearance. But that's a good reminder, especially this time of year where there's a lot of growth.
Yes, Commissioner
Raymond, thanks so much. I'm hoping we can have a conversation because I have a couple topics to talk about, and I hope it doesn't. We can talk more later, maybe.
Sure.
So in terms of that 33% for the neighborhoods, and I agree with Commissioner Boland, I would very much rather staff take a proactive look at what they can do rather than relying on feedback. And part of that is timeliness. But part of it is that you guys are experts, and I wish that City Administrator Crawford was still here to hear that you guys are the experts, and I think that we should trust what you guys want to do. So one of the things that came to mind with especially the no through traffic. So this is a specific example, but it speaks to a broader question maybe. This might have been a year ago that some of the arterials around Burns Park, including North and South or Lower Burns Park, there was a lot of construction. And there was a ring around that perimeter along Washtenaw Stadium and State that had the local traffic only signs there. Was that a proactive move, or did residents have to request that based on construction? i.e., can't we anticipate where we need to have these things placed and put them in rather than waiting for people to request them, and cut that timeline down a lot and rely on expertise rather than people plugged in to response. So maybe you can talk to that one, and then I got a couple of others.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. I wasn't project manager on that project. I do know what you're talking about. I'd have to go back and check. I think probably what I is, you know, construction project, we do a maintenance of traffic plan. And typically we don't reroute traffic through the neighborhood. We try to reroute it on the arterials. And I suspect that's probably what it was, is that those streets were still open so that neighbors could get to their houses, but it wasn't used as kind of the detour or the official flows of traffic, because those neighborhood streets aren't really meant to kind of carry those volumes.
Yeah, 100%. So the main point I'm trying to get at is that we anticipated that traffic volume based on construction. I'd like to consider those circumstances where we can anticipate closures or limiting access ahead of time, just like we do with construction. Like, why can't we do that?
Right.
So other follow-up, Raymond, is how much of this is residentials versus how much is arterials? Is arterials just out of the mix at this point?
No. So there are probably two different solution sets that we're contemplating. So for the local neighborhood streets, it's the closed to through traffic, local traffic only sort of treatment. That sort of treatment is, maybe a series of cones, maybe a small barricade sawhorse that says, road closed to through traffic. But cars can get around it. At the end of the day, it's not a full closure. Cars can still access it because people need to be able to access the house. For the arterials, I think the discussion or the opportunity, or what's up for consideration is possibly the outer lane closure, right? So any road where we have multiple lanes in a single direction, again, since traffic is down 50% or more, is there the opportunity to take away that outside lane, cone off the whole entirety of it, and allow people to walk or bike in it. So that is identified in the memo. It is an opportunity. It is something that, again, we're looking at our documents to see which of those roads create which connectivity, and then also looking at the public input that we're receiving to see if, those are issues that are being suggested.
That's great, Raymond. I just want to, I know this is anecdotal. You know that I live near Packard. If you've been on the commission, I've said that word many, many times about that road. I witnessed a beginning cyclist ride down the grass median in front of Cobblestone Farm in order to avoid people. And I've witnessed wheelchairs, mobility devices, and bicyclists riding in the middle of Packard in the turn lane in order to create this space. So whatever we can, I don't want to rely on citizens to communicate, hey, this is the need. I'm really hoping that staff can figure out where these exist. And one of the tools, I think, is that the pedestrian and bike count study that was attached with our homework showed that the southeast corridor has a lot of bicycle traffic, and a surprising lot of bicycle traffic, according to the counts, and yet most of them are on the sidewalks, which immediately signals to me, well, you can't have social distancing if less than 20% of the cyclists are in the road, if 80% or more are on the sidewalks. That maybe we need to be able to pinpoint those sort of locations. So I don't know, overall, I want to suggest that staff feels comfortable empowering themselves to move forward, and maybe we could talk about how to do that as we move forward, all in a timely fashion, because I think the sooner the better. We're about to come to summer and summer temperatures, and things are going to expand.
Right.
As always, Raymond, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Commissioner Woods, and then Commissioner Hull, and then Commissioner Griswold. I'll stack it up.
Okay, just a couple of questions or comments, and I do appreciate why we would be thinking about perhaps thinking in terms of streets being not a through street. But also, first question I have is, what happens if there are violators? If you don't live there, but you still want to go down certain streets, that's one question I have. Would that be something that you might get a ticket or a warning or something like that? And then let me just explain my second question or comment, and that is, in the society that we live in right now, too often we're seeing folks who are getting stopped for going into certain areas where they don't appear to live there. And there are sometimes some really unfortunate consequences that happen from that. And I'm putting it out there because I don't want something like that to happen in Ann Arbor. And yet things could also happen in Ann Arbor. So while this is an idea that I think is certainly worth talking about, I guess I would just kind of caution us as to how we proceed, and just to be careful of some of the stumbling blocks and tragedies that can happen like that. So that's just something that I just really wanted to say.
Yeah, Commissioner Woods, I appreciate both of those points. I think to your first question about what happens with violators who repeatedly are still cutting through a neighborhood even if they don't live there, admittedly it would probably be complaint driven, right? So it would probably take someone in the neighborhood to notify us that, at this time every day I see this car drive through, they don't live here. And then, there may be some targeted enforcement. Admittedly, I haven't talked to police department about it, so I don't know exactly what tools they have for enforcement. My anecdotal observation is in the past that hasn't been too much of a problem, but again, these are different times, so I don't know how much things will change and if there will be kind of repeat violators in this instance. I do appreciate the point you brought up about different experience for closing a street may be a different experience for different people. And that trying to be very sensitive. I actually was on a healthy street style webinar just last week. And there was an African-American lady who pretty much is speaking to the point that you're saying, which is, Ahmaud got shot for running in the street, right? And so, is this something we need to be we obviously need to be sensitive to it and really figure out that, you know, this experience can be positive for everybody in the community, and that it's not, you know, we're not approaching it myopic through one without trying to really understand the multiple viewpoints on the issue. So it is something as part of our discussion. I actually spoke to Chairwoman Klein on this today. I've spoken to Kayla Coleman about it as well, and we're really trying to, you know, think through that. And again, I encourage you or any other commissioner, if you have good thoughts on this, please share them with us, because some of this stuff is new, and you know, I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. And so I value any perspective or any input that you all can help guide this conversation is more than welcome.
Commissioner Hall, I think you're up.
Yeah, so I was wondering about the pedestrian signal activation. I know like a lot of the places that have buttons, and there was talk about like, yeah, making it so that they automatically, it sounds like in Ann Arbor, they're just doing a case by case and doing this on select buttons. I'm wondering why not do it for all, because the traffic is down citywide, and the idea, the concern about touching surfaces matters everywhere, not just in select areas, which is, I'm just wondering about this and why it's only being done in select areas for select signals.
Yeah, Commissioner Hull, thank you for that question. It is something we talked about, admittedly. We said, you know, what would be the impact of rolling it out citywide? One thing I would say is if it's something the Transportation Commission recommends, I would encourage you all to make that recommendation. So we were initially running a skeleton crew for the signs and signals staff for the last 2 months. They just came full. So admittedly, a little question of bandwidth. As you think about any intersection, they have upwards of 8 push buttons, and we wanted to make sure we added signs to each push button so that people knew they didn't have to push the button, right? Because it would kind of defeat the purpose if they don't have to push the button, but they're pushing it anyway. So that was one limitation, admittedly, and so that's why we rolled it out selectively. We knew downtown was already covered. We selectively went around the medical campus, and if there were any other requests that had been made, we would tackle those. The other thing too is, there's a long-term question about which improvements we make that would have to be undone in the future. Pedestrian recalls is one of those ones about, if things return to normal, whatever that may mean. Do pedestrian recalls stay? The activation stay permanently, or is it something that we roll back to the way it was, where you end up having to push the button? And on certain corridors, obviously, that affects all the different traffic movements, right? But again, I don't pretend to have all the right answers. Some communities have moved, and some of these webinars I've been on, some communities have moved to all PED recalls at every location. So the point that you're bringing up is something we are seeing in other communities. Some are rolling them out kind of stepwise like we are, and it really is, we started off with this kind of stepwise fashion.
All right, I think Councilmember Griswold, I think you're up.
Okay. I wanted to respond to Bradley and just mention that the only streets where there's going to be a survey required are the residential streets. So we wouldn't have to wait for something like Washington or Packard. Staff could take the initiative on that and develop a plan. And then I had 2 questions. The leading pedestrian intervals, do they add to the time that it takes for the signal to go through the complete? Okay, so with leading pedestrian intervals, if you have it on 4 lanes, that's going to add 12 seconds. Oh, okay, so if a pedestrian's waiting to cross the street, they may have to wait 9 seconds more.
Right, or depending, so we do 3 seconds as identified in the memo. So, if it's a traditional 4-legged intersection, Typically, you would only have, north-south and east-west movement, so it could be as little as 6 seconds of total
Okay.
head-only phase, but it really depends on how many cycles there are, if there are dedicated left turn lanes and those sort of things. All of that kind of factors in. But yeah, at a typical four-legged intersection, 6 seconds to 12 seconds of head of time that would otherwise not be there.
Okay, so could it even be longer if you had dedicated left turn lanes as well, like you do at Plymouth and Green? That seems to be a very long cycle.
Yeah, and another thing, we have adjusted some of the signal timing during this. We have a, sorry, sometimes I pause because I get a pop-up that my connection is unstable. We've changed the signal timing cycles to cycle through kind of a more predictable pattern than we have this adaptive signal control system that some of you may have heard about, Scoot. We've pretty much turned off Scoot, and we're just letting it kind of cycle through. And the idea is if we do that, then everybody kind of gets served in a predictable manner, and it's in theory a little bit more streamlined for the lower traffic that's out there today. If there are intersections that are still experiencing kind of excessively long, signals in one direction and not the other, again, let us know. We can go in, we can adjust those on our end. So you said Green and Plymouth, was it? I can have Luke look at that.
Green and Plymouth is quite long. When I try to cross Plymouth Road, it seems to be a few minutes. The other one that I've heard is a problem is Main and Stadium, where people frequently cross against the pedestrian signal because they don't want to wait that long. And then my last question is the pedestrian recall, is that the same amount of time that gets added? And is that what you were talking about in addition to the leading pedestrian intervals?
Yeah, it would,
Yeah.
right? So that's kind of what I was getting at is, if you think about the network as a whole, pedestrians are important. We're obviously giving time to the pedestrians, but that does take away from the overall green time of, the vehicle movement or makes those cycles longer. So, downtown it makes sense, but on certain corridors that might have kind of a ripple effect. And those are some of the things that we try to balance. It doesn't always work out the way we hope, but those are the things that we're contemplating. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The pedestrian recall and the leading pedestrian interval do interact. Those are two strategies that kind of overlap.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Commissioner Lernahan.
I just have one question. I'm wondering, what are some of the ways in which we're going to be notifying residents of upcoming or implemented changes? I know there's going to be probably some signage. Will you be using social media, maybe talking to neighborhood associations? I just wanted to get an idea of how we're going to be communicating this.
Yeah, that's a great question. Kayla, let's put that on our list of things to talk about tomorrow. I think right now, so much of our communication is changed because of social distancing and because, shelter in place and stay-at-home orders. We are relying pretty heavily, I think, on social media for neighborhoods that might be affected. If there are HOAs and we have an HOA contact, that's another great avenue for us to get the word out about it. I'm sure we would also communicate through our council members. It's pretty typical that anytime we do any transportation projects, we communicate it to them and they can put it in their newsletters if they have newsletters or anything like that. So there are a couple ways, but admittedly they're probably not all inclusive. There might be people who would be surprised that, wait a second, this sign went up at the end of my street. What the heck is that all about? We've talked about adding some better contact information on the website I showed you earlier, so that we can receive calls in and kind of respond to those. It's not just via the tool and via email. So we're going to be kind of adding some of those into the process. But it's I'd be lying to you if I said we're going to reach everybody, because I know we won't.
I know I have a few comments, but I want to make sure everyone else has had a chance to speak before I jump in. Okay. Thank you so much, Raymond, for this. I'm really excited about the way this plan is shaping up. I think it's going to make a really big difference for residents here at what is really a very difficult time. I've already encountered the leading pedestrian intervals in places that they didn't used to be, and they made me very happy. I like exclaimed, and my kids were like, "What are you talking about?" I think I want to just sort of emphasize a couple of things that some of my fellow commissioners have talked about. I think we want to be really careful about enforcement. There's always this balance when we're talking about transportation issues that I think some advocates tend to sort of default to like, well, we just need more police, we need more surveillance of these areas, but that's not actually what makes streets safer for some of our population. And I want to make sure that we're really balancing those interests as best we can. As others have mentioned, I think that a third of the street's residents is too many. I think that that's going to be a real barrier to getting any of these residential streets approved. I'd love to see staff be proactive if possible. I had a couple of ideas for ways to maybe look for streets where this is likely to be accepted. One of them is if there are any known cut-through streets. So either we know that there are issues with ways where they're directing people through these neighborhoods. Those known cut-throughs would probably really get a disproportionate benefit from some of this rerouting that we're talking about. I wonder also about roads that have previously been through the traffic calming process or roads that are currently in the queue on the waiting list for traffic calming. My guess is that those are also roads where there would be resident acceptance and a benefit because we know that there's already problems on those roads. I had one other thing that I wanted to talk about. Oh, in terms of getting the word out, because I want us to take these resident requests. I don't know, maybe 3. I know that 1 is probably not enough people on the street, but I'm okay if it's 3. That seems like, I don't know how that we're going to get that many more, depending on what kinds of streets we're talking about. But probably you haven't been thinking about physical posters, but there are still a few places where people have to go. So one is the areas in the city where the school district is distributing food for kids who used to get free lunches. We could put posters in those places. Food banks and other places around the city, maybe even just straight up grocery stores. If there are ways to sort of get some signs up where people can see them and like snap a picture with their phone to sort of raise awareness. The farmers market, I think, is open again. There are these handfuls of places where people are going. So I think in order to move off of social media and reach people who aren't necessarily having access to the internet, having access to computers, I think that would be really valuable. I think those are all of my points. Like I said, this looks great. It's really comprehensive. I'm really excited about what this is going to do for Ann Arbor, and I hope soon, as soon as possible. So thank you so much.
And thank you all for your thoughtful comments. Again, we're still figuring all this out. I think communities across the country are figuring this out. So, this sort of input is the exact sort of stuff we want to hear, and I thank you for that.
Great, thanks. All right, so now I'm going to move on to some business. First up, we've got the Micromobility Committee appointment for Commissioner Summers. So Commissioner Summers has volunteers to participate on the Micromobility Committee. He's attended the last few meetings, I think originally as a member of the public and then more recently as a commissioner, but he hasn't yet been formally appointed to the committee because we've had this gap. So first, I just want to open it up to any commissioner questions or comments. Jim, I don't know if you want to say anything about the Micromobility Committee before we talk about it.
I don't have a lot to say. It's just that from my perspective, unique perspective of working with, light electric vehicles for the last 8 to 10 years, I just saw some things that were jumping out at me that was going to cause problems. So I just wanted to offer my input if it was at all valuable.
And I will say that it absolutely has been. You've brought some expertise to the committee that we didn't have before, and it's been a big help.
Okay. that's all I have to say, really.
Great. Any questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to ask for a motion to appoint Jim Summers to the Micro-Mobility Committee.
So moved by Felt.
So moved by Felt, and I need a second. Commissioner
Second by Woods.
By Woods. Okay, so a motion was made by Commissioner Felt and seconded by Commissioner Woods, that the Transportation Commission appoint Jim Summers to the Micro-Mobility Committee. And we're just going to do show of hands to vote. So all those in favor? Great, it looks unanimous. So thanks so much. You're officially on the Micro-Mobility Committee.
Great.
And then we're going to move into the Micro-Mobility Committee update, which is me. So I actually do have an update this time. We're making some progress. We have some draft language that was in the packets for this meeting. Now, Raymond, please correct me if I'm wrong. It's been through a round with the city staff, and it's been through a round with the committee, and we've been through a bunch of revisions. Are we still waiting for legal review at this point, or have we already gotten the legal review? Not yet. So we're still waiting for legal review. Do we have a sense of the timeline on that? Oh, Kayla, it looks like you wanted to say something.
If I can. Well, Commissioner Summers did provide some feedback. So we put the draft ordinance that was in your packet that I sent out on Friday, I believe. And Commissioner Summers, I think you got back to me over the weekend with some additional comments on that. So there's a little bit more that Raymond and I need to look at together and see it. And I have to be honest, Commissioner Summers, that I have not yet had a chance to review that since getting it a couple days ago. So we will review that and see if that's going to be some easy changes to incorporate, or if it's something that looks like it needs further committee discussion. But then it will go along to legal. So legal does not yet have the most current version, but then I'll let, if Raymond wants to venture to guess or speak at all as to how long the turnaround time is expected to be. I'm not sure that we know that, but I think that's what you were asking.
Okay, shrug emoji, got it. All right, so that's the update on micromobility. Are there any questions or comments about that? Okay, great. So we're going to move on to the 7th Street Process Committee update, and that's going to come from Commissioner Felt.
Well, in the interest of time, I think you've got the basic information in your packet. We identified a great number of questions that mostly fell on staff to answer, and obviously things got waylaid. And so we're just working through that and need to set up another time and all that kind of thing. But it was a very productive and interesting meeting, I thought. And we'll get back as we have more information. Do you have anything to add, Julie?
No, I just think that it's a tricky situation because there's some real tension there. There are a lot of residents along that street, and yet it's arterial or connective road, and it's really tough.
That's all I've got.
Okay, great. Thank you. So next we are moving on to the comprehensive. Oh, nope. Was there a question?
Sorry.
I missed one. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to, because I think it's going to be coming up in a future agenda item, is to talk about speed limit setting again, or a clarification on how that's set. And one of the things that I saw in the update was a staff response as to why North 7th is 25 miles an hour, but the rest is 30 miles an hour. And that was based on being next to a park, I believe. So I'm really hoping that it's not a general discussion that we have about speed limit settings. It's more a discussion in the future about how we can take more action to control better our speed limit settings. And I'm speaking specifically to, forgive me, I'm looking at my computer up above me. this is in the, is it the municipal vehicle code? Yes, 257.627F. 25 miles per hour in a highway segment with 60 or more vehicular access points within a half a mile. If we're going to clarify 7th as an arterial, it seems that we're clarifying it basically as a highway. Can we attribute that to lowering speed limits? And granted, we have to do designs to help that happen. But there's clearly a disconnect between what we might be allowed to do or allowed to pursue, as opposed to sort of the boilerplate the state dictates what we have to do. So anyway, that's that. The other thing is that in terms of a stop sign at Madison and 7th, I understand that the staff response was that the stop sign can't be a traffic calming measure. It needs to be a right-of-way measure. But I'm wondering, right now, there's not a right-of-way measure, but only because we have a left turn lane that's already there. If you took away the left turn lane, would there be a right-of-way issue? Who gets to turn when and all that kind of thing? So I wouldn't mind us exploring that. I understand you can't put a stop sign in for traffic calming, but you can certainly design the road to better facilitate people moving through, and that might include having a way to signal people to stop to figure out who goes when.
So Brad, forgive me, I don't know, are you currently on the 7th Street committee?
I'm not, but I had a long, deep talks with folks. Linda Diane might be able to help me better remember which subcommittee it was on.
Okay.
When I was diving into these things. And I can, I think Seth knows these things too. Chris, I can't remember his last name right now.
Hewitt.
Yeah, Hewitt.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know, I wanted to bring them up here to at least acknowledge that there might be ways that we can dive a little deeper into these issues.
Okay, so we can maybe talk about looking for a future agenda item, and Kayla or I can reach out to you about crafting what that agenda item might be. I also wonder, since speed limits keep coming up and it sounds like there's maybe legislation being considered at the state level, whether we might want to consider a resolution at a future meeting around supporting that legislation if we decide that, if we would have to look at it first and see if we like it, but that might be another thing to discuss.
And maybe I can speak to it more at once we talk about future agenda items, but I'm very curious, it came up previously too, how can we get an exemption for Ann Arbor to go below that 25 mile an hour state dictated?
Right.
How is that even possible? Is it what would it take?
Right.
I think it's worth exploring.
Okay, so we'll put this on the list for the future. And then
Awesome.
I think there were no other comments about 7th Street, correct? I know we're getting close to 9 o'clock, so I'm going to try and start hustling us through. So now we're going to move on to the comprehensive transportation plan supplemental work, and this is something that we're going to have to vote on supporting. And I think Commissioner Hess, you were going to talk to us a little bit about it first.
Yes, thank you. So I'll just give a very high-level overview, and then we can dive into a little bit more detail. You may recall back in November, we provided the draft scope of the Sam Schwartz contract. Sam Schwartz is the consultant that's currently plan update. Pursuant to a resolution that Council passed, I believe in October or maybe early November, there was a discussion about them doing some supplemental work to kind of analyze the bicycle pedestrian environment. And so we presented a version of this scope back to you in November. It was taken to City Council in January. City Council gave us some directive to kind of re-look at some of the scope. And so we had a different scope that we brought back to City Council in February, if I remember correctly. and they had recommended that the Transportation Commission look at it because, you know, you hadn't seen the latest version of the scope, nor had you really taken action on it back in November. And so the scope that you have in front of you is kind of the latest, greatest as we understand it. It is something that we were going to take back to City Council per their directive. The scope, just real quickly as I go through it, is task 1 is an inventory of current facilities. Task 2 is a documentation of existing resources. Task 3 is to develop a report, and task 4 are presentations. And then task 5 are some additional committee meetings and additional commission presentations as well. All 5 of those tasks total $21,700. Tasks 1 through 4 are $12,700 if those are taken kind of in isolation. So, you know, again, I'm happy to go into more detail on any of these. My apologies that there's been kind of this disconnect in the timeline just because we didn't meet for the last 2 months. We weren't able to discuss this in February because the City Council meeting was, you know, 2 days, a day and a half before this commission met in February, so we weren't able to put it on the agenda as an action item. Then the March meeting was canceled, the April meeting was canceled, and here we are in May. So that's why this has kind of taken as long as it has, and I apologize for that.
Okay, so before I take a motion to vote on this resolution, I just want to see if anyone has any questions or comments. Councilmember Griswold.
Given the current financial conditions and the direction that council has given, I can't imagine that council is going to approve any money for this contract at this time. And it really grew out of the fact that council approved a professional engineer with Vision Zero expertise effective July 1st of 2019, and there was difficulty in hiring that person. So then I talked to Howard Lazarus about, well, if we couldn't hire that person, could we have someone from Sam Schwartz come in and just do an analysis of our physical environment for pedestrians and bikes? And then the project became more than that. And I think now that we can get this physical environment assessment through Michigan Department of Transportation, SEMCOG, or one of our partners, but the direction from council is not to spend any money on consultants at this time. So I won't be supporting it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Parsons, I think, or yeah, was it Brad? Was that you?
Yeah. Mixed feelings. I was ready to vote yes, but I think Kathy might be right. That it's best to keep things out of consultant hands. I would like to see this done though, and I would like to see it done in-house. The other thing that I want to say is that as written, what we've asked Sam Schwartz to do is to inventory what we currently have, not necessarily to dig deep into what we don't have. And that is gaps, and that is connectors. There's also, a movement within bicycle infrastructure and advocacy that we talk about low stress versus high stress corridors. I would like an expert to map out our city and figure out what are high stress points and what are low stress points. We might have infrastructure on Stadium near Maple, for instance, but that is a high stress corridor. Nobody wants to bicycle on that, especially with kids. So I would like a deeper dive into this subject. And I am open to hearing what others think about Sam Schwartz doing this preliminary work, but I see this preliminary work. It might be needed. So I'm willing to hear more on the topic.
Raymond, I have a question actually about this. So my understanding is that there is actually a fair amount of expertise within the city staff on and engineering and designing complete streets. That's sort of the easiest term I can think of. And I'm wondering, in your assessment, is this work that the city has the capacity to do? Or is this really, in terms of training, skill, expertise, not necessarily time, because I realize everyone is really strained right now. But that's my first question.
Yeah, so you broke up a little bit on me. My apologies again. But if I think I understood you correctly, it was just an extension of a point Commissioner Parsons brought up, which is, do we have the capacity in-house to do this? Yeah, I think there is. And to maybe clarify the point that Councilmember Griswold mentioned and Commissioner Parsons, this is kind of an assessment of the existing environment, right? That's kind of the idea, is kind of go up and down the streets and kind of quantify, you know, especially with a safety lens, you know, how well does the network perform? How safe is it for bicyclists, pedestrians, and others? To a point that Commissioner Parsons brought up, the bigger project that Sam Schwartz is working on, the transportation plan update, which we call Moving Towards Vision Zero, is going to talk about the future looking stuff. So this was really meant to be the inventory, and then there's the future looking stuff. So, you know, you will start seeing iterations. As a matter of fact, Kayla can attest, we're working on a survey right now on the low stress bike network. We hope to have that. You know, there's a little confusion about when we can launch it, because we have this other engagement tool I just described to you related to healthy streets. And so we want to make sure people understand where we're getting their input from and what we're applying it to, and trying to figure out not to step on each other's toes in that regards. But so the plan, what I mean to say is just the plan is meant to identify, you know, those opportunities in the future. How can we create a low stress bike network? And we're continuing to see, you know, some of that preliminary that publicly as well. So then, Commissioner Kleiman, to your point, do we have the capacity in-house? We do, right? I mean, we have certified engineers. You know, the certifications that we have are, you know, both educational attainment experience and certifications that we have are some of the highest you can get in the field. Both planning and engineering. So it is something we could do in-house. And you know, I do appreciate the point that Councilmember Griswold brought up about, you know, the resolution saying to really look very kind of critically at any consulting work that comes before council, because, you know, we're in a bit of a fiscal crisis right now, and we have to be you know, fiscally prudent. So I completely appreciate that. Again, the timeline of where we are is, you know, if this was discussed in January, February, it would have been probably a different discussion than now in May. So I appreciate that and understand, you know, if the outcome is what the outcome is, and if it's something that we do with in-house resources, that's something that we could program into our workflow.
Thank you. I see you, Councilmember Griswold. I actually have a question for you, so I'm going to ask you this question, and then you can share your response and also whatever you wanted to say. So, correct me if I'm wrong, but Councilmember Griswold, were you the person who had originally requested the work that sort of became this resolution?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and now,
just a subset of it.
Okay, and now you don't support it.
I only supported a subset of it to begin with, and this whole discussion started in January of 2019, and so there's been a lot of staff development in that time, and we have in-house Vision Zero expertise. I know Cyrus Nahidi, I believe he worked for Sam Schwartz in Chicago before he was hired. So again, a lot has changed and improved in the last year plus.
Okay. Great, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, Commissioner Lernahan.
Hey, yeah, I don't have the documents in front of me, but I think I read that there would be 1 day allotted for assessment. And I just wanted to know, would that be enough time to do the assessment? Yeah, I wish I had it in front of me so I could read it. But I'm just thinking, are there going to be example streets if this goes through? So that's one of my questions.
Yeah, I think the way the tasks are broken down are how many estimated hours Sam Schwartz anticipates for the work to be done. So the inventory of current facilities is at 14 hours, and the documentation of existing facilities, which I think would also include some site visits, is about 42 hours. So I think those two things combined probably total, the better part of a week or more. So I think the idea was for them to do a fairly comprehensive sweep of the city. That's what we had always envisioned for that work. That would be what we would instruct them to do, because I think that's what the directive from council is, what we understood it to be.
Okay. And then if we did do something like this in-house, what would the timeline for something like that be?
Yeah, we'd have to kind of weigh it against all of our other work that we're doing. And so, if this becomes our highest priority, then we just need to understand what the trade-offs are, and that, Craig Hupy is my service area administrator, and the interim city administrator, Tom Crawford, that they just understand that, we can go full throttle on this. We can, drop everything we're doing, but these other things may lag behind. And obviously with healthy streets, we're putting a lot of resources towards that at this exact moment. So there are some high priorities that we're working on right now. And, we would obviously look to, senior management at the city to see which should be our highest priorities. So that being said, I mean, if we did all hands on deck, we could knock it out in a similar time frame. If we had to kind of, do a little bit at a time, it would take longer. So I know that's not a very specific answer, but that's probably the best I can give you right now.
Yes, Commissioner Woods.
It is a project that I certainly would support if we were not in the situation that we're in right now. And I think just like with our own budgets at home and elsewhere, we've got to sometimes sort of move things around and try and see how we can accomplish the same thing with different resources. And I do think we have excellent city staff. And so I think I would hopefully, I'm sorry Mr. Crawford had to leave us. Maybe he saw what was coming down the pike. But at any rate, I would like to perhaps see if city staff cannot see how they might be able to at least approach this. And if it's something that we can't quite do because of the priorities, then that's just the reality that we're in right now. So helps us to, if council has said we're not paying for anything, I don't see much sense in really trying to move this particular item forward. I think there are certainly other times when, for me, I would go to the mat on it, but in this case, it's something that perhaps we just don't have much control over at this point.
All right, do I see any other comments or questions? Okay, so then now I'm looking for a motion. So what we're moving to do is recommend that City Council approve the resolution to appropriate $21,700 from the general fund to fund additional tasks associated with the Comprehensive Transportation Plan Update Project, and to approve an amendment to the professional services agreement with Sam Schwartz Consulting, LLC, which was originally set at, it looks like $373,370. So do I have a motion to do this? I think even if we're going to vote against it, I think we still have to move it. Is that right? Kayla, we can.
Right. Sorry, I was on mute for a second. Maybe Raymond knows. I don't know that they have to use that motion language.
Oh, okay.
This item was referred from City Council to the Transportation Commission, so that's why we're talking about it.
Okay.
And I prepared that draft motion based on the language in the council resolution, but it would seem to me that the commission can decide what you want your motion statement to be.
Okay, so then I'm going to wipe that out. Let's try this again. We're going to move not to recommend all those words from before. and we'll go from there. So do I have a motion to not recommend the extending the agreement with the Sam Schwartz Consulting? And I see Councilmember Griswold as moving it. Can I have a second? I saw a couple hands. All right, Commissioner Boland is the second, and then
I have a question.
Oh yes, question.
I think typically resolutions have to be made in the affirmative, so I don't think we make a motion to not do something.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I just went.
No, I appreciate that. I still have no idea what I'm doing. So
I appreciate that too.
Yes, Commissioner Boland.
Yeah, sorry for the delay. I was wondering if we could make an affirmative motion to do it in-house, to accomplish those goals in-house.
I'm seeing nods. That sounds like a good plan. Okay. So I'm going to try and word this in a motion soundy way on the fly. So we're going to move to recommend that the City of Ann Arbor plan to do the review that was originally going to be in this contract with Sam Schwartz Consulting. We're going to do that in-house. So let's try that. So that's the affirmative motion to move that work to happen within the city. And can I get a motion for that? Oh, go ahead,
yeah,
Brad.
I just I want to approve the motion, but also allow you some flexibility to work with language along with Raymond. I think you both understand the spirit of where this is coming from. So along those general lines, yeah, I'm 100% supportive.
Okay, great. So are you moving it, Brad?
I'll move it. Sure.
Okay, great. So
Sure.
Commissioner Parsons, and can I have a second? Commissioner Boland, I saw you first. Okay, great. So now we're going to raise hands again. How many are in favor?
Oh, sorry,
Okay.
sorry, Molly. Just real quick. I wouldn't, if it is going to be, the language is going to be tweaked a little bit between what we're voting on now and in the future. I'd like Commissioner Griswold, Councilmember Griswold, to have a say in that as well, because I think it's important to her, and it was originally from her, and so I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Got it. Yes.
All on the same page.
Okay.
Cool.
So all in favor? Okay. Oh, and anyone opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you all for helping me through that. And I see that we're already past 9 o'clock, and we've got a couple of more items on the agenda. And I wanted to ask, let's see, it looks like one of these is Julie, and one of these is Commissioner Boland, and one of them is Commissioner Coleman. And I just want to check with the group if we feel okay about tabling these agenda items to the next meeting. Is this, I think that's the appropriate word that I would use for this suggestion.
If possible, I'd like to just plant a seed for next week for
Yes.
our discussion.
That'd be great.
Do you want me to do that? Tell me when you want me to do that.
Yes, I will. So for the committee work item, Kayla, is that something that we can hold off on?
Yeah, I don't think that that's time sensitive. It was just a work plan item that we're trying to get to.
Yeah, I know we had several months pile up into this one agenda, and
Yeah.
so I knew it was going to be a little bit crowded.
Yep,
So,
fine.
all right, great. Thank you. So yes, Commissioner Boland, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to start a discussion about how to make our voices heard as effectively as possible with council, so we can be effective in promoting the policies that we believe in. And I just wanted to have a discussion about that. Maybe people who are in other commissions could talk about things that have been successful for them. One of the things I was thinking about was trying to do a better job of communicating our rationale and communicating that not just to council, but to the public also. So I just wanted to throw that out there as something to think about between now and next week, or not next month, when we can talk about it in more depth.
Thank you. I think this is a really important subject, and I thank you for bringing it to us. And yeah, maybe we can make sure this is at the top of the agenda for next month. I have a feeling this backlog is going to take us a couple of months to work our way through. Okay, thank you. So moving on to staff report and updates from Commissioner Hess.
Yes, and in the interest of time, I will go through this really quickly. So forgive me. You may recall things are structured a little bit differently now so that everything in this report is new from last month to this month, or at least has new language on it. So, I don't think it's probably too it's not a waste of your time to kind of highlight all those. There's some interesting updates on the Allen Creek berm opening. The big heavy lift of the work was done just last week, I think it was. There's a very cool YouTube video that shows time lapse. I encourage you to check it out. It's kind of nifty. Sidewalk repair program started last week of April. Resurfacing started earlier this month, May 11th. The Barton Drive Resolution 4 for the special assessments passed at City Council on May 4th. Huron Street improvements just talks about a lot of the coordination we have ongoing with MDOT. The Jackson Avenue and Washtenaw Avenue Sidewalk Gap projects, construction began on Washtenaw last week, or this week, I guess. And the resolution for Jackson was postponed to, I believe, the second meeting in June, if I remember correctly. From Monday night is when that was heard by council. Hollywood Drive has been postponed to 2021 for budgetary reasons. So that shows up in both the sidewalk gap as well as under the or like streets program. So you'll see that those changes identified there. Fuller Court, Nixon, Traver Sidewalk, that was another one where the special assessment was approved by council on May 4th. People-friendly streets, there's hoping to be some public engagement that's scheduled for spring, summer of 2020. Arbor Bike, there is, there are obviously very unspeakable casualties to speak about related to COVID-19, but Arbor Bike is one of the things that has suffered in a kind of other sense. It's just the ride is experiencing a lot of difficulty right now. They are the lead agency on that, and it's not going to launch this year. We've given you signs of hope earlier this year that it was going to launch, and it is not going to get off the ground. Curbside management, there's some talk about a Transportation for America initiative that the city's involved with. There's a website there that you can check out what that is going to involve. Healthy streets, we've talked a lot about that today. I will start putting updates on healthy streets in this space, so keep an eye out for that. MDOT coordination, there is some updates on the Huron-Thayer crosswalk. There's a lot of back and forth right now between whether it is a HAWK signal, pedestrian hybrid beacon, like what you have at Chapin, 3rd, and Huron, or an RRFB. Apparently, the State Historic Preservation Office has gotten involved, and they're kind of influencing some of the design. So stay tuned. When we know more, we'll report back. That project is a 2021 project, so just to highlight that as well. North Main Street is also a project that looks like it's going to be postponed for the foreseeable future, maybe several years. MDOT was concerned that they weren't going to be able to do effective public engagement on that project, and they had a fairly aggressive timeline to get that project done this year. Well, the design and engagement done this year, that they can't meet those timelines now. The updates on Office of Sustainability and Innovation in large part have to do with the A20 carbon neutrality plan. You already heard from Dr. Stoltz this evening. Streetlight implementations, we are going to give you kind of a running total of how many streetlight installs are done, as well as how many outages have been addressed. So just look for that month to month. Traffic calming program, we are moving forward with virtual public engagement. I believe it's June 4th, Kayla, is when we're planning on doing that. So we're going to do a Zoom engagement for kind of the final, this is the second round of engagement, so that'll be an interesting thing. And then lastly, the transportation plan update. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at the low stress bike network and engagement related to that. And so hopefully that'll kind of roll out here sometime soon.
Okay.
And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much. Next up, we have liaison reports. So any commissioners who specifically serve as liaison to another body or organization are invited to provide reports and updates. Yes, Commissioner Hall.
Yeah, so I represent the Commission on Disability Issues. We just had a Zoom meeting earlier today. We have been talking about the HB 4738 crosswalk law, though we're kind of deferring that a little more just because we want to see some of the updated crash data. And yeah, the other thing I wanted to provide an update on, this is the Commission on Disability Issues, but I know the RTA, I'm on the Citizens Advisory Committee for that. Yeah, obviously all the transit, well, Triple ATA and like the ones in the Detroit area are running reduced services, and they had a Detroit to Ann Arbor bus that had just started service but then had to end it because of the COVID-19, because it just the demand wasn't there, obviously. And yeah, just looks like there's not going to be any RTA millage this year, both because of the legislature not agreeing on it and if the COVID situation. But yeah, I know, yeah, we're going to come back and talk a little more perhaps about the crosswalk situation. And I guess that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you. Any other reports from liaisons? Commissioner Woods and then Councilmember Griswold.
Just briefly, just wanted to mention in terms of the Planning Commission that we too have been meeting via Zoom, just as this commission is, and just one item that came on our agenda on Tuesday evening that while we have postponed this particular item for more information, it will have an impact, I think, that this commission would be interested in. And that is a project on Jackson Road. It's a proposal for 2 hotels, which will be in a parcel. I can't remember the amount of land that's out there, but it's right near Jackson Road, near the entrance ramp to I-94. And it's near Weber's restaurant, if you're familiar with that area. And the reason why I thought it might be of interest to this body is because as part of what may happen with that area, some sidewalk improvement will happen so that it'll make a difference in terms of some gaps in sidewalks right over in that issue. And also Jackson Road is a MDOT or state road, and the state is considering putting a traffic signal right at that entrance ramp as well. So I thought people might be interested in that. But as I indicated, it has been postponed for more information. So it's not a done deal at this point. I just wanted to update you on that.
Thank you so much. And then Councilmember Griswold.
2 items. The first one is that I asked other council members if they might be willing to serve on the Transportation Commission so that we could have 2 council members given our schedules. No one was interested. However, with the pandemic, there isn't much else happening on Wednesday night. And the other one is there was a streetlight update report that's that's on the agenda, and that really came from a discussion that the mayor and I had when I was concerned about crosswalks without lighting. And so we talked about not putting in a new crosswalk unless the lighting was there. And I have had some questions from community members, and so I would like to get a response from a professional engineer in terms of, is it better to have no crosswalk rather than a crosswalk without lighting? Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. So is that a question you'd like to put forward to staff to help us get an answer on? Okay. Got it. Any other liaison reports? Okay. So then we're going to move on to commission member communications. And this is for any member of the commission. Oh, right, because we have someone new. I should explain all these things. So yes, this is the moment when anyone on the commission can make a brief comment about anything related to transportation. Yes, Commissioner Parsons.
So I don't know how much this is related to transportation, but welcome, Brett. And I just want to say it's so nice to hear your voices and see your faces, and that this is really encouraging, and the passion that folks have and the knowledge that they have, it's always inspiring. And I also want to give a special shout out to staff. This must be an extraordinarily difficult time, but they seem to be doing wonderfully. And so I just wanted to acknowledge and say that and encourage their continued great work.
Yes, I will happily second that as well. Thank you. The staff has done an amazing job. Thank you. Any other commissioner communications? Okay, I have one real quick, which is that in addition to our new member, Brett Hadamaki, we also had 2 reappointments. So Commissioner Parsons and I have both been reappointed to Transportation Commission. And so we will be with you for another 3 years. And I'm thrilled. I love doing this work, and I'm very pleased to continue to be able to do it. So next up, we have the call for agenda items. And it sounds like we already had a few that came up during the conversation that I think, Kayla, you've probably captured. Are there any other agenda items that we haven't discussed yet?
Madam Chair, if I may just real quickly, I've already talked to staff about the discussion related to speed limit setting, and we're happy to do that at the next meeting. I would encourage any of you, if you have some specific questions you'd like for us to answer, I want to make sure we come prepared to answer those. So, if maybe 2 weeks or so before the meeting, if we could set a deadline that, these are the questions you'd like for us to address in that presentation, let us know by the first week in June or so, whatever, something to that effect. So anyway, we're happy to do that in June. Just make sure we're addressing what you're doing, what you want us to address.
Great, thank you. Okay, and as you know, as always, if you have other thoughts for agenda items that come up later, you are welcome to email them to Kayla and myself, and we will get them into the schedule. So now, well, let's see. It looks like we had a few on the list already. Yeah, so.
I think, Molly, in the interest of time, are you looking at the upcoming agenda items?
I was going to skip ahead.
Yeah, I think we can skip ahead. You all have a work plan, a copy of the work plan. We referenced that when we set the agenda.
Okay. Great, thank you. So the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, June 17th, 2020 at 7 p.m. This will be another virtual meeting, and access details will be provided to commissioners and to the public when it gets closer. And so if there are no objections, we will adjourn our May 20th, 2020 meeting. Are you objecting, Brad? No, you're not objecting. Okay. Great. So, oh, you're moving. You're moving to adjourn?
Yeah, I'm saying bye.
Okay,
bye.
Good. Great. So seeing none, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.